Now, it's been written, I've read it actually in liner notes, people taking Buddy to task for the drum battles with Gene at Jazz at the Philharmonic in the 50s for disrespecting him or showing him up on the stage. I mean, I've read it in print, and that means that a lot of people read it who don't know and will carry that thought. What do you say to that?
Well, I'll tell you something. Buddy told me the story of the first time he and Gene were called on a stage to do this, the Jazz at the Philharmonic. Now, at the time, because of hype and press agents and this and that and media and this big thing about who's number one and the number one drummer and
Number one.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Slingerland Drum Company always called Gene Krupa the king of the drums, the number one drummer of the world.
Right.
And by this time, Buddy had left them. He was with Ludwig, and Ludwig wants to call Buddy the number one drummer. In other words, they got this same thing. Even the photographs were the same. They looked the same poses and all that. Well, Buddy said finally Norman Granz decided to have the drum battle, because it would be a big seller on the stage. Just like the things with Lester and Flip Phillips and all that, Illinois Jacquet, and they get out there and start honking away. And who could honk louder or faster or whatever. So, if you hear any funny noises, I'm licking on a piece of butterscotch, folks. So, the way Buddy said, he got to the theater, and Gene was already there and was already set up and everything. And he walked in, and he saw Gene when he went. They said hi to each other from a distance, And he says, we really weren't that friendly at the time. I mean, we were friendly, he says, but, and he said, and I always respected him, he says, but this thing was going on, And all of a sudden, Gene's wife, Ethel, walked over to him and said, well, now we'll find out who is the number one drummer.
Wrong thing to do.
Yeah, and he said, what? What brought that on? He couldn't believe that anybody would come up to him like Gene did. I don't think Gene knew she said that, but she did. So Buddy said, well, this is going to be one of those scenes, and of course now he realized there's going to be a real battle of the drums out there. So eventually Gene... he says, I let Gene run the show because, he was older and been around more, and I thought he was number one. He says, I wanted to be, but I thought he was, And he came over to me finally, and he says, all right, Buddy, here's what we'll do when we go out there later. He says, we'll each have our group to play with. He says, and he says, I'll do my bit, and then you do yours, and then the groups will leave. And there'll be just the two sets of drums out there on the stage. He says, no. He says, we'll just play back and forth a little bit. We'll start off with, we'll play some a medium tempo thing, play some blues or something with the drums. And then I'll play a long solo, I said, no, we'll do some 8s and 4, some 12s and some 4s, And then I'll do a long solo. And then I'll stop, and then you do a long solo. And then, I'll join you at the end of your solo, and we'll go into a bop, 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 bop. We'll end, something like that. Buddy said, okay. Okay, so that's what happened. Gene went out and played with his group. He played a couple of tunes, or a tune, or whatever. And then Buddy played probably the same group, or else they might have divided the groups up a little bit, because there was all these Roy Eldridge, and Flip, and like I said, those guys, and Charlie Parker, everybody. So now they start the drum battle, and they started out cha da ka ta da ka ta da ka da ka, and of course the audience is screaming and they waiting for this big thing. So Buddy said, I was really prepared to keep it simple and have some fun, and so he says, Gene, we started and we did some 12s, and then we did some 4s, and in fact we did some 2s, he said. And then all of a sudden, Gene says, all right, I got it. And he says, and the lights went out, and these spotlights that Gene had facing went up.
No.
and here's these shadows up in the sky behind him,
Yeah.
and I said, well, wait a minute now.
Yeah.
And a big show business solo started at that moment.
Yeah.
And Buddy said he wasn't prepared for that. He said, I never saw him do that. He said, I saw him do it later on, but he said, but I never saw that bit with the lights. I said, when he was telling me, I said, I saw it when I was a little kid. He did that with his big band. He says, yeah, but I never saw it. I didn't know he was going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that had the people going nuts immediately when they saw that, That started it right off. It didn't matter what he played because it looked great,
Yeah.
It was fantastic. So he finally, all of a sudden, he stops. He finishes and points to me, and his lights go off, and the spotlight goes on me, just a regular spotlight, and I started. And I thought, okay, I got to top you. I'm sorry. So he says, I started out at the tempo he just finished, medium. He says, and I started building, and then I doubled, and I tripled.
Oh, no.
He says, and while I was tripling and tearing the house apart at that point, Gene dropped a drumstick or two. He just dropped his sticks, bent down behind his big bass drum, and yelled up from down below so the people wouldn't know. They thought he was picking up his sticks or something,
Right.
and he's yelling at me, for gosh sakes, bring the tempo back down again. He said, I can't play that fast. I can't, I can't make it, And Buddy heard him, He's yelling, don't make me, I can't join you there. I mean, I can't do it. In other words,
Right.
And Buddy started slowing down till he got down back to an easy tempo, and then Gene joined him, and they went out.
Wow.
And he said, and from that time on, they became the closest of friends, and nobody cared or thought anything about number one. They just became very good friends from that day on. I said, well, that's great, because I always thought you were. He says, no, but that's how it was, and that's how it became.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's the true story. Okay.
Well, that was Buddy told me that
Yeah.
story. I mean, I didn't read it anywhere. He told me personally.